Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. I keep trying to remember what happened after I saw that shadow. The memories come in pieces, like broken glass reflecting different moments that might not even belong together. Sometimes I think I'm putting together a puzzle, but the pieces keep changing shape in my hands. I remember the hallway so clearly it hurts. The way the morning light filtered through that window, casting everything in this pale, watery glow, my bare feet on the cold wood. The sound they made wasn't quite right though, too hollow, like I was walking through an empty house that should have been full. There was a humming, not from any machine I could identify. It came from somewhere deeper, like it was rising up through the floorboards themselves. I can still feel it sometimes, that low vibration that seemed to crawl up my spine and settle behind my eyes. When I concentrate, when I really try to pull it back, the humming gets stronger. It makes my teeth ache. I must have kept walking because I remember other rooms. A kitchen with sunlight streaming across a table. Toast crumbs scattered on a plate. The butter was still soft. Someone had been eating breakfast recently, but I can't remember if it was me. The chair was pulled out at an odd angle, like whoever had been sitting there had left quickly or been pulled away. The smell of metal comes back to me sometimes, sharp and clean, like coins pressed against skin. It mingles with something else, something organic that I can't quite place. When that smell hits me now, my stomach turns and I have to sit down. My hands start shaking and I don't know why. There was a door, I'm certain about the door. It was painted white, but the paint was chipping near the handle, showing dark wood underneath. The handle itself was brass, tarnished in places where fingers had gripped it over and over. I stood in front of that door for what felt like hours, though it could have been minutes. Time wasn't working properly. Behind the door, light leaked out from underneath. Not electric light, something else, something that pulsed with the same rhythm as that humming in the walls. I wanted to turn the handle, but my hand wouldn't move, like my body knew something my mind had forgotten. Sometimes I dream about opening that door. In the dreams, there's a figure standing just inside, perfectly still. Their back is to me and they never turn around, no matter how long I wait. Their clothes look familiar, but I can't place them. The figure breathes but doesn't move otherwise, just stands there waiting for something. I must have walked away from the door because I remember being in a different room. This one had no windows. The walls were a pale green color that reminded me of hospital corridors. There was a chair in the center, facing away from me. Leather straps hung loose from the armrests. They looked well used, worn smooth in places. The air in that room was thick, heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. Every breath took effort and tasted of copper. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it echoing off the walls, or maybe that was someone else's heartbeat. The sound was coming from everywhere at once. I keep trying to remember what I saw when I walked around that chair. My mind hits a wall every time I get close to that moment, like there's something my brain refuses to let me access. But I can feel it there, pressing against the inside of my skull, demanding to be remembered. The shadow from outside, it wasn't gone. Somehow it had gotten inside. I remember seeing it move across the green walls, but shadows don't behave like that. They don't move independently. They don't reach toward you with what look like fingers. There are gaps, long stretches where I can't account for what happened. I'll be remembering the green room and then suddenly I'm somewhere else entirely. A basement maybe. The air was colder there and smelled of damp earth. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. Each drop echoed like it was falling into a vast, empty space. My clothes were different. I don't remember changing them. The fabric felt rough against my skin, like it wasn't mine. There were stains on the sleeves that looked dark in the dim light. When I touched them, they were still damp. There were voices coming from somewhere above me, muffled by distance and walls, but definitely human. They spoke in rhythms that almost made sense, like a conversation I was hearing underwater. Sometimes one voice would rise higher than the others, urgent and sharp. Then silence would fall like a weight. I tried to call out, but my voice wouldn't work properly. The sound that came out was wrong, distorted, like hearing myself through broken speakers. The voices above stopped when I made that sound, complete silence, then footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the ceiling. The humming was stronger in the basement. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating through the concrete and into my bones. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't coming through my ears anymore. It was inside me, part of me. I found stairs, wooden steps that groaned under my weight. Each step up brought me closer to those voices, but also closer to something else. Something that made my skin crawl with anticipation and dread. My hand on the railing was shaking so badly I could barely grip it. The door at the top of the stairs was the same white door from before, the same chipped paint, the same tarnished brass handle, but that was impossible. I had been in the basement. The geography doesn't make sense. Nothing about that place made sense. This time I turned the handle. The metal was warm, almost hot, like it had been sitting in direct sunlight. The door opened silently, revealing that pulsing light I remembered, but now I could see its source. My memory fractures here, splits into fragments that don't fit together properly. I remember light so bright it burned. I remember the figure from my dreams, but now they were turning around. I remember screaming, but the sound was still wrong, still distorted. Most of all, I remember understanding something, a truth that hit me like cold water, washing away all the confusion and fear and replacing it with something worse. Certainty, the knowledge of what was happening, what had always been happening. But I can't hold on to that understanding. Every time I get close to it, it slips away like water through my fingers. All that remains is the feeling of having known and the terrible certainty that I don't want to know again. I woke up in my own bed, at least I think it was my bed. The sheets smelled wrong and there were impressions in the mattress that didn't match my body, like someone else had been sleeping there. The morning fog was drifting across the lawn outside my window, exactly like before. The same bird was singing the same tune. But something was different. The shadow outside wasn't flickering anymore. It was solid, permanent, and it was closer to the window than before. I've been trying to write this down to make sense of the fragments, but the more I write, the more I remember. And the more I remember, the more that humming grows stronger. It's not just in my memory anymore. It's here now, rising up through the floorboards of this room. The door is here too. I can see it in my peripheral vision, that same white door with the chipped paint. It shouldn't be there. This room doesn't have a door like that, but when I turn to look directly at it, it's gone, only visible when I'm not trying to see it. The figure from my dreams is getting restless. I can feel them moving, shifting their weight from foot to foot. Soon they're going to turn around. Soon I'm going to see their face and remember everything. The smell of metal is getting stronger. My hands are starting to shake again. The humming is so loud now that it's drowning out everything else. The bird outside has stopped singing. I think I need to stop writing now. Something is waking up, something that's been sleeping in the spaces between my memories. The shadow outside is pressed against the window, and I can see it clearly now. It's not a shadow at all. The door handle is turning, story 2. The clock's rhythm stuttered, losing its sync with the dance of my heartbeats. My steps across the kitchen floor found a dissonance, each footfall echoing differently than expected. I reached for the handle of a mug, its warmth felt misplaced, as if borrowed from another morning. Outside, a shadow lingered behind the opaque curtain, swaying gently to an unseen breeze. It was then I noticed the tick of the clock had reversed, a second hand spiraling backward. I hadn't touched it, but somehow it was changing. That's when I knew I had to remember, had to piece it back together, fragment by fragment, like collecting shattered glass with bare hands. The memories come in waves that crash without warning, leaving me gasping in their wake. I write this now because the silence between the fragments is becoming unbearable, and maybe if I arrange the pieces just right, the picture will finally make sense. There was coffee. I remember coffee because the smell clings to everything else, metallic and bitter, like pennies dissolved in acid. The kitchen counter felt cold beneath my palms, but my skin was burning, always burning. The mug, was it blue, green? The color shifts when I try to focus on it, sliding away like water through my fingers, but the warmth was wrong. Wrong temperature, wrong texture, wrong time. The shadow behind the curtain moves in my peripheral vision even now, swaying, always swaying. I've checked the windows countless times, pulled back every curtain, but there's nothing there. Nothing but the memory of something that shouldn't exist. The fabric was white, I think, or maybe cream. It billowed inward as if the house was breathing, drawing something inside with each inhale. My feet remember the kitchen tiles before my mind does. Cold ceramic, slightly uneven where the house had settled. 12 steps from the counter to the window, 14 to the door. But sometimes the numbers change and I find myself taking 17 steps or 9, and the walls seem to stretch and contract like a lung filling with stale air. There was a sound. God, there was always a sound. Not the clock came later or maybe earlier. Time doesn't behave the way it should in these memories. The sound was deeper, thrumming up through the floorboards and into my bones. A hum that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. It would start low, almost below hearing, then climb until it filled every space inside my skull. I remember pressing my hands against my ears, but the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within or beneath or somewhere that didn't have a proper direction. The kitchen floor vibrated under my feet, a gentle tremor that made the coffee in my mug ripple in perfect concentric circles. The light was wrong too. Everything about that morning was wrong, but the light was the first thing I should have noticed. It came from behind the door, not the front door, not the back door, but the door that leads to the basement. Except we don't have a basement, never had one. The realtor made that very clear, something about the water table and soil conditions. But there was a door, and there was light bleeding through the gap at the bottom, warm and golden and completely impossible. I touched the handle once. The metal was so hot it nearly burned my palm, but I couldn't let go. My hand stayed there, fingers wrapped around brass that pulsed like a heartbeat, while that light grew brighter, and the humming grew louder, and something on the other side pressed back. The shadow figure appeared that same morning, or maybe it was a different morning entirely. Memory doesn't follow rules anymore. It was tall, impossibly thin, standing just beyond the kitchen window, but when I looked directly at it, there was nothing there. Only in my peripheral vision could I see its outline, wavering like heat mirages rising from summer asphalt. It never moved away from the window. Even when I fled to other rooms, I could feel it there, patient and still, waiting for something I couldn't understand. The curtain would move, that gentle swaying motion, and I knew it was still there, still watching, still waiting. My skin remembers things my mind has forgotten. There are patches on my arms, my shoulders, places that feel different to the touch. Not scars exactly, but areas where the sensation is muted, like touching something through thick fabric. They're warm, always warm, even when the rest of me is cold. Sometimes I catch myself running my fingers over these spots, tracing patterns I don't remember making. The coffee grew cold while I stood frozen in that kitchen, but the mug stayed warm, burning warm. I set it down on the counter and watched steam rise from the liquid surface, even though it had been sitting there for what felt like hours. The steam formed shapes, twisted spirals that almost looked like letters, like words I should have been able to read but couldn't quite decipher. I think I screamed, the memory of sound escaping my throat, raw and desperate, but I can't remember hearing it. Like watching a movie with the volume turned down, seeing my mouth open wide, seeing my body convulse with the effort, but experiencing only silence. The scream lives in my chest now, a constant pressure that never quite releases. The clock stopped completely at some point, not just running backward but frozen, its hands locked in position like arthritic fingers. I stared at it for what might have been minutes or hours, watching for any sign of movement, any indication that time was still functioning the way it should. But the second hand remained motionless, pointing accusingly at a number I can't recall. When I finally looked away, when I finally turned back to the window, the shadow was gone. The curtain hung still and lifeless, no longer swaying to that impossible breeze. The light beneath the basement door had faded to nothing. The humming had stopped. Even the wrongness of the coffee mug seemed to have settled into something approaching normal. But I knew it wasn't over, could feel it in the spaces between my heartbeats, in the pause between inhaling and exhaling. Something had shifted, some fundamental rule had been broken, and the pieces were still falling into new configurations. I left the kitchen that day or that morning or whenever it was, and I didn't go back for a long time. But the memories followed me. They always follow. The warmth of that impossible mug, the vibration of the floor beneath my feet, the golden light that had no source, the shadow that existed only when I wasn't looking directly at it. And now, as I write this, as I try to make sense of fragments that don't want to fit together, I can feel it starting again. The familiar hum rising up through the floorboards, the light beginning to bleed beneath a door that shouldn't exist, the shadow taking its place behind the curtain, swaying gently to a breeze that comes from nowhere. The clock on the wall has started moving backward again. Its rhythm stutters, losing sync with my heartbeat just like before. My coffee has gone cold, but the mug burns against my palm. Outside, something waits with infinite patience. I think I understand now, or maybe I'm further from understanding than ever. The memories aren't trying to tell me what happened. They're trying to tell me what's still happening, what never stopped happening, what's about to happen again. The basement door is getting warmer. Story 3. The file cabinet was found open at 08:45 hours. Examination of contents revealed all documents were in alphabetical order, suggesting recent organization. No visible footprints on the freshly vacuumed carpet, yet a faint scent of bleach persisted. The window blinds were drawn tightly, casting no discernible shadow in the room. The computer was powered off, but the screen retained a ghostly glow, indicative of recent activity. An empty mug rested on the desk's edge. The chair was slightly askew, as if abandoned mid-motion. No personal belongings were recovered. Curiously, the door was locked from the outside. I keep reading that report over and over. The words swim together sometimes, like ink bleeding through wet paper, but I know why I can't stop looking at it. It's because I've seen that room before. Not in real life, of course, in the dreams. The first dream was simple enough. I was floating, weightless, in what felt like a vast empty space. There was a hum, constant and low, like the sound an old refrigerator makes when it's struggling to keep cool. Above me, an oval light pulsed with a rhythm that reminded me of breathing. Slow inhale, slow exhale. The light never moved, just hung there watching. When I woke up, I dismissed it. Stress from work, probably. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. The usual suspects. But the smell lingered in my nostrils for hours afterward, sharp and clean, like ozone after a thunderstorm, but somehow artificial, manufactured. The second dream came 3 nights later, or maybe it was the same dream continuing where it left off. Time moves strangely when you're asleep. The floating sensation returned, but this time I could see more. Walls, distant and curved, like being inside a giant egg. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and there was something else. A voice, metallic and distorted, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The syllables felt familiar, like a song you know but can't remember the lyrics to. The oval light pulsed brighter, and I felt myself being lifted higher, though no part of my body actually moved. My limbs felt heavy, disconnected. The voice spoke again, clearer this time, but the words slipped away the moment I tried to focus on them, like trying to hold water in your hands. I woke with a start, heart racing. The dream had felt longer this time, more detailed, more real. But dreams always feel real when you're having them, don't they? It's only afterward that the logic falls apart, that you realize you were flying or talking to your dead grandmother or sitting in a classroom naked. But this dream didn't fall apart. The details stayed sharp, crystalline. I could still feel the sensation of being lifted, still hear the echo of that metallic voice. And the smell was there again, clinging to my skin like smoke. That morning I noticed something odd, a small bruise on my forearm, perfectly round, about the size of a quarter. I couldn't remember bumping into anything. The skin around it was slightly discolored, with a faint ring pattern that looked almost like a fingerprint, but larger, much larger. I told myself it was nothing. People get bruises all the time without remembering how. Maybe I'd knocked into the doorframe in the dark or bumped against the kitchen counter while making coffee. The mind plays tricks, especially when you're not getting enough sleep. The third dream was different, longer, more vivid than any dream I'd ever had. I was back in that curved space, but now I could see details I'd missed before. Panels along the walls, smooth and seamless, with a faint luminescence that seemed to come from within. The humming had changed too, becoming more complex, like multiple frequencies layered on top of each other. The oval light descended closer, and I could see it wasn't just a light. There was structure to it, patterns within patterns, like looking at a circuit board through frosted glass. The metallic voice spoke again, and this time I caught fragments, something about files, about organization, about completion. I tried to move, to turn my head, but my body wouldn't respond. I was aware of being touched, examined, though I couldn't see what was doing the touching. The sensations were clinical, methodical, like being at the doctor's office, but wrong somehow, too precise, too deliberate. Time bent and stretched. Minutes felt like hours, hours compressed into seconds. The voice continued its monologue, and I began to understand that it wasn't speaking to me. It was speaking about me, recording observations, making notes. When I finally woke, sunlight was streaming through my bedroom window, but I felt like I hadn't slept at all. My body ached in places that made no sense, and there were new marks on my skin. Small, circular impressions along my spine, too uniform to be natural. That's when the contamination began. I started hearing the humming during the day, faint at first, barely perceptible over the normal sounds of life, but it was there, constant and familiar. I'd be sitting at my desk working and suddenly become aware of that low, thrumming frequency just at the edge of hearing. When I'd stop and listen, really focus on it, the sound would fade. but the moment my attention drifted, it would return. The oval light appeared too, not in the sky or hanging from the ceiling, but reflected in windows, in puddles, in the black screen of my phone. Always the same shape, always pulsing with that slow, breathing rhythm. Other people didn't seem to notice it. They'd walk right past windows where I could clearly see that familiar glow, completely oblivious. I began losing time, small chunks at first. I'd sit down to eat lunch and suddenly realize it was dark outside. I'd start reading a book and find myself 3 chapters ahead with no memory of turning the pages. My movements felt automatic, like I was following a script I couldn't see. The marks on my body multiplied, always in places I couldn't easily see: my back, behind my ears, the soles of my feet. Always the same circular pattern, like stamps from an invisible seal. I took pictures with my phone, trying to document them, but the images always came out blurred or overexposed, as if something was interfering with the camera. Electronics began acting strangely around me. My computer would turn on by itself, displaying screens I'd never seen before, grids of numbers and symbols that hurt to look at directly. My phone would dial numbers I didn't recognize, connecting to automated voices that spoke in that same metallic tone from my dreams. When I'd hang up and check the call log, there would be no record of the calls. The dreams continued, but now they felt more like memories. I was no longer surprised by the curved walls or the pulsing light. I knew what came next: the descent of the oval, the clinical examination, the methodical recording of observations. I began to anticipate the voice's words before it spoke them. And that's when I started to suspect. What if they weren't dreams at all? What if something had happened to me, something I couldn't quite remember? The marks on my body were real. The electronic interference was real. The lost time was real. Maybe my mind was protecting me from something too difficult to process, wrapping it in the soft gauze of dream logic to make it bearable. I researched memory suppression, dissociative disorders, trauma responses, but nothing quite fit. The experiences were too consistent, too detailed. Dreams fade, but these were growing sharper, more defined, like photographs developing in a darkroom, slowly revealing their hidden images. The report about the file cabinet haunted me. That room, with its freshly vacuumed carpet and locked door, felt familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. I'd never been there, of course, never even seen a picture of it. But I knew how the light would fall through those tightly drawn blinds, knew the exact angle of that askew chair. I began to wonder if the dreams were showing me something that had already happened, or something that was still happening. The voice in my dreams had mentioned files, organization, completion. What if I was the file being organized? What if this was all part of some larger catalog, some systematic recording of experiences I couldn't consciously access? The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt almost comforting, like finally understanding the punchline to a joke everyone else had been laughing at. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture I wasn't sure I wanted to see completely. Last night I had the dream again, but this time was different. This time I was prepared. I found myself in the familiar curved space, the humming filling my ears like a lullaby. The oval light descended as always, pulsing with that breathing rhythm. The metallic voice began its observations, cataloging details I'd heard dozens of times before. But something was wrong, or right, depending on how you looked at it. I could move, not much, just my eyes, but it was more control than I'd ever had before. I looked around the space with new clarity, seeing details that had been hidden before. The panels on the walls weren't just luminescent, they were screens, displaying information in languages I didn't recognize. charts and graphs and flowing text that seemed to be updating in real time. The voice was closer now, and I could see its source. Not a person exactly, but not a machine either. Something in between, something that existed in the space where organic met artificial. It was making notes on a device that looked like a cross between a tablet and a living thing, its surface rippling with each touch. Subject shows increased awareness, it said, and this time I understood every word. Adaptation progressing ahead of schedule, memory barriers weakening, recommend acceleration of final phase. I tried to speak, to ask what it meant, but my voice wouldn't work. The thing with the device looked at me directly, and I saw something that might have been recognition in its features. Integration nearly complete, it continued. Subject will be ready for retrieval soon. The oval light pulsed brighter, and I felt the familiar sensation of being lifted. But this time I could feel the mechanism doing the lifting, not magic or dream logic, but technology, precise, purposeful, alien. I woke up in my own bed in my own room, with morning light streaming through familiar windows. Everything was normal, mundane, exactly as it should be, except for one thing. On my nightstand next to my phone was an empty mug, the same mug from the report, the one that had been sitting on the edge of that desk in that locked room. I'd never seen it before in my life, but I knew its weight, its texture, the small chip on the handle where someone had dropped it years ago. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was real, solid, warm, as if it had recently held coffee. Inside, at the bottom, was a single drop of liquid, not coffee, something clear and oily that smelled like ozone and artificial storms. The humming started again, louder now, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The oval light reflected in the mug's surface, pulsing with that familiar rhythm. And somewhere, just at the edge of hearing, the metallic voice was speaking. Retrieval initiated, it said. Subject is ready. I set the mug down carefully, as if it might explode. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from recognition, from the terrible understanding that I'd been here before, done this before, lived this moment in a dozen different variations. The dreams weren't dreams, they never had been, and now, finally, I was beginning to remember what they really were. The file cabinet was found open at 08:45 hours, but I think I know who opened it. I think I know who organized those documents, who vacuumed that carpet, who locked that door from the outside. I think it was me, or something wearing my face, using my hands, following instructions I'd been given in those curved rooms under that pulsing light. The question isn't what happened to me. The question is what I'm supposed to do next, what my purpose is in this larger design I'm only beginning to glimpse. The mug sits on my nightstand, waiting. The humming continues, patient and constant. And somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, between memory and dream, the voice is calling my name. It's time to go back, story 4. The lock didn't click when the key slipped inside. My fingers traced the cold metal, seeking the familiar resistance that never came. The hallway swallowed my footsteps, each step muted against the carpet that should have whispered of presence. I reached for the light switch, expecting the room to blink awake, but the shadows only deepened. The air felt dense, charged with an expectation that held its breath. I pressed against the door frame, certain it would push back, but it yielded, unnaturally compliant. Somewhere an absence lingered, leaving me hovering on the edge of knowing what should have been but wasn't. There's this humming, it starts in my teeth, travels down my spine like electricity finding ground. The sound doesn't belong to any machine I know. It's too organic, too deliberate. Sometimes I think it's coming from inside the walls, other times from inside my skull. The frequency makes my vision blur at the edges, makes colors bleed into each other like watercolors in rain. I can taste copper on my tongue when it gets loud. The humming follows me now, even when I'm nowhere near that place. It's become the soundtrack to my mornings, the lullaby that keeps me awake at night. I wasn't alone in there. The certainty sits heavy in my chest, a weight that won't dissolve, something breathed in the corners where light couldn't reach. Not the steady rhythm of sleep, but the careful, measured breathing of something trying not to be heard. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, studied, catalogued. The air moved wrong, disturbed by shapes that shouldn't exist. I held my breath until my lungs burned, listening for proof, but silence pressed back against my eardrums like cotton. When I finally exhaled, the sound echoed back to me changed, as if it had been filtered through something else's understanding of what breathing should sound like. My thoughts scattered like startled birds. Words formed in my mind that I didn't choose, concepts that felt foreign sliding across my consciousness like oil on water. I reached for familiar memories and found gaps, spaces where certainty used to live. The voice in my head that narrates my daily existence stuttered, replaced by something that spoke in frequencies I could feel but not understand. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked right, but the thoughts behind those eyes felt borrowed, second-hand. I caught myself responding to questions no one had asked, nodding along to conversations that existed only in the spaces between my heartbeats. The light came from everywhere and nowhere. It didn't cast shadows, didn't illuminate surfaces the way light should. Instead, it seemed to emanate from within objects themselves, making the walls glow with an inner phosphorescence that hurt to look at directly. The air shimmered like heat waves rising from summer asphalt, but the temperature never changed. Shapes moved within the brightness, geometric forms that folded in on themselves in ways that made my eyes water. Sound died in that light, absorbed before it could travel. My voice disappeared the moment it left my throat, creating a silence so complete it felt solid, tangible, like something I could reach out and touch. The taste lingers, metallic and sharp. It coats the inside of my mouth like I've been sucking on pennies. It's strongest in the morning, right after I wake up, before my conscious mind has time to build its daily barriers. My coffee tastes wrong now, filtered through this persistent flavor that won't wash away. I've started noticing the taste in other people's voices when they speak to me, as if their words carry traces of whatever left this residue in my system. Sometimes I catch myself running my tongue along my teeth, searching for the source, but it's everywhere and nowhere, woven into my saliva like a permanent alteration to my chemistry. But maybe the light was different. Maybe it pulsed instead of glowed, strobing in patterns that matched no earthly rhythm. The shapes weren't geometric at all, but fluid, organic, breathing with a life that defied description. The silence wasn't complete either. There were whispers underneath, conversations in languages that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to the primitive parts of my brain that still remember when humans huddled around fires and feared the dark. The walls didn't glow from within, but reflected something that wasn't there. Mirrors showing me rooms that existed parallel to the one I stood in, populated by figures that moved just out of focus. I've stopped trying to make sense of it. The fragments don't want to form a complete picture, and maybe that's for the best. Some knowledge changes you in ways you can't undo, leaves marks on your perception that never fade. I catch myself checking locks twice now, running my fingers along door frames, searching for that familiar resistance that tells me the world is solid, predictable, safe. But everything feels slightly off kilter, as if reality has been knocked just a degree or two out of true. The humming has become my constant companion, and I've learned not to fight it. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between heartbeats, I almost understand what it's trying to tell me. but I pull back before the meaning becomes clear, because some doors once opened can never be closed again. Story 5. It sounded like a soft, insistent tapping at the window, not loud but persistent, like a rhythmically repeated question without words. I hesitated in the kitchen, my fingers grazing the surface of a chipped mug, the sudden chill from the porcelain unexpected. The tapping continued, meticulous and measured, as if counting out something just beyond comprehension. I knew it wasn't the wind. I drifted towards the living room, where the air seemed thicker, almost charged. The curtains stirred slightly, although the windows were closed. It was a sound I had known before, in a distant hallway where whispers lingered long after the lights went out. I hadn't heard that knocking since everything changed, but it was back. The sound has returned every evening for weeks now. Always the same pattern, always from the same window facing the woods. My television turns itself on during the deepest hours of silence, cycling through static channels that hiss with voices I cannot quite understand. The refrigerator hums at frequencies that make my teeth ache, and the light bulbs in my bedroom flicker in sequences that feel deliberate, almost like Morse code spelling out messages in a language I have never learned. Sleep has become impossible. When I close my eyes, I feel the weight of observation pressing against my eyelids. There is something patient waiting just outside the periphery of my vision, something that knows I am aware of its presence. The air conditioning unit clicks on and off with mechanical precision, but the sounds it makes are wrong somehow, too organic, like breathing through metal lungs. I have tried explaining this to others, but their faces take on that particular expression of polite concern that people wear when they believe you are losing your grip on reality. They suggest stress, exhaustion, perhaps a visit to someone who might prescribe small white pills that promise to quiet the mind. But I know what I experience each night is not manufactured by my imagination. The electromagnetic interference that turns my radio into a symphony of whispers is measurable, tangible, real. My hands shake now when I hold objects made of metal. Silverware feels charged with static electricity that makes my fingertips tingle and burn. The bathroom mirror sometimes reflects light from sources that do not exist, casting shadows that move independently of my movements. I have started avoiding reflective surfaces altogether, but even the black screen of my computer monitor sometimes shows me things that should not be there. The memory that haunts me most clearly happened on a night when the darkness felt heavier than usual. I was standing at the edge of what I now understand was the beginning of everything, though at the time it seemed like nothing more than another sleepless evening spent staring out at the tree line. The silence was so complete it felt like being underwater, muffled and dense and pressing against my eardrums with uncomfortable intensity. Then I saw it. A figure stood motionless between the trees, barely visible in the dim starlight. Not moving, not breathing, simply existing in that space where the shadows gathered most thickly. It was too far away to make out details, too still to be human, too deliberate to be a trick of light and darkness. The figure remained there for what felt like hours, though time had begun to behave strangely by then, stretching and compressing in ways that made measuring duration impossible. I could not look away. Something about its presence demanded attention, drew my focus like gravity pulls water downhill. My neck began to ache from holding the same position, but moving felt dangerous, as if any sudden motion might trigger something I was not prepared to face. The figure never moved closer, never retreated, never acknowledged my observation, but I knew with absolute certainty that it was aware of me watching. When I finally blinked, it was gone. The space between the trees looked exactly as it had before, empty and ordinary and innocent. But the air still carried that electric taste of ozone, and my skin continued to prickle with the sensation of being studied by invisible eyes. Going back further, I remember the signs that should have warned me something was building toward that moment. The humming had started weeks earlier, so low and constant I initially mistook it for the sound of distant highway traffic. But highways were miles away from where I was staying, and the sound never varied in pitch or intensity the way vehicle noise does. It was mechanical yet organic, artificial yet somehow alive. Electronic devices began malfunctioning with increasing frequency. My phone would dial numbers I had never entered, connecting me to empty lines that carried only the faint sound of breathing that might have been wind through underground tunnels. The laptop screen would brighten and dim in slow pulses, like a heartbeat made of light. Batteries drained overnight, even when removed from their devices and stored in drawers. Time started slipping away from me in small increments. I would sit down to read for a few minutes and discover hours had passed without my awareness. Meals grew cold on plates I did not remember preparing. I found myself standing in rooms with no memory of walking there, holding objects I could not recall picking up, staring at walls that seemed to pulse with barely perceptible movement. The temperature fluctuations were subtle but persistent. Rooms would grow cold in patches, as if invisible doorways were opening to let in air from somewhere much colder and darker. I would walk through these pockets of chill and feel my breath catch, my skin tighten with goosebumps that had nothing to do with the actual temperature. Sometimes the cold spots moved, drifting across floors and up walls like slow, searching fingers. But even before the humming, before the electrical disturbances, before time began its strange behavior, there was something else. A moment so brief and seemingly insignificant that I almost missed it entirely. I was sitting outside in the early evening, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains, when a wave of nausea rolled through me like motion sickness. The sensation was accompanied by a metallic taste that coated my tongue and made swallowing difficult. The air smelled wrong, charged with ozone and something else, something organic and unfamiliar that reminded me of copper pennies left too long in stagnant water. My vision blurred at the edges, and for just a moment the familiar landscape seemed to shift and waver like heat mirages rising from summer pavement. I felt a vibration in the ground beneath my feet, so subtle it might have been imagination, but persistent enough to make me question whether the earth itself was trembling with some kind of anticipation. The sensation traveled up through my legs and settled in my chest, where it resonated with my heartbeat until I could not tell where the external vibration ended and my internal rhythms began. My gaze drifted upward toward the darkening sky, and for reasons I could not articulate, I felt compelled to keep staring at that empty expanse long after the stars appeared. Something was about to begin, though I had no way of knowing what form it would take or how completely it would alter everything I thought I understood about the nature of reality. The evening had started so peacefully. I remember settling into the quiet routine that had become comfortable over the previous weeks. The cabin was simple but adequate, surrounded by enough wilderness to provide the solitude I thought I needed. The nearest neighbors were miles away, the nearest town even further, and the silence felt like a luxury after months of urban noise and constant human contact. I had prepared a simple meal and eaten it while watching the light fade from the western sky. The air was clean and cool, carrying the scent of pine needles and distant rain. Birds called to each other from the trees with the casual conversation of creatures settling in for the night. Everything felt normal, predictable, safe. The generator hummed with mechanical reliability, providing enough power for basic needs. The radio picked up a few distant stations that played music from decades past, comfortable and familiar and reassuring. I had books to read, supplies to last for weeks, and no schedule to maintain except the natural rhythm of sunrise and sunset. I thought I had found the perfect place to disappear for a while, to let the world continue without my participation while I figured out what came next. The isolation felt protective rather than lonely, a buffer between myself and all the complications I had left behind. I believed I was alone out there, unobserved and unimportant, just another temporary visitor to a landscape that had remained unchanged for centuries. But I was wrong about being alone. Something had already noticed my arrival, had already begun the slow process of making contact in ways I was not yet equipped to recognize or understand. The tapping at the window that would eventually drive me back to civilization had not yet begun, but the attention that would manifest as tapping was already focused on me with patient, inexorable intent. Even now, as I sit in this different place surrounded by the familiar sounds of human activity, I know that attention has not withdrawn. It waits with the patience of something that exists outside normal time, something that understands I will eventually return to places quiet enough for it to make itself known again. The tapping will resume when the conditions are right, and next time I might not have the strength to run away. Story 6. The cool evening breeze slipped into the room, rustling the delicate lace curtains that danced in the fading twilight. The lingering scent of lavender mixed curiously with the faint odor of something sharp and metallic. In the quiet of the living room, the clock on the mantel ticked steadily, yet the air seemed to hold its breath. To the left, a window was left ajar, allowing the night to whisper secrets into the cozy warmth. Outside, shadows stretched long and unnaturally, converging towards the house as if silently beckoning me to uncover what lay hidden within their depths. That's the only memory I trust completely. Everything else comes in pieces, fragments that don't quite fit together the way they should. There was this sound, a humming that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. Not electrical, not mechanical, but something alive and breathing. It would start low, almost below hearing, then rise until my teeth ached with it. The frequency made my vision blur at the edges, made my hands shake against whatever surface they touched. Sometimes I think it came from above, sometimes from below. The humming would stop suddenly, leaving a silence so complete it felt like being underwater. My ears would ring for hours afterward, a high whine that made me question if the sound had ever existed at all. I wasn't alone in that room. I know this with the same certainty I know my own heartbeat, but I can't tell you who was there or what they wanted. The presence felt heavy, like someone standing too close behind you in a crowded elevator. My skin would prickle with awareness, every nerve ending alert to movement I couldn't see. The air would shift, warm breath on my neck that shouldn't have been there. When I'd turn around, the space would be empty but still warm, still holding the impression of something that had just stepped away. The feeling of being watched never left, even when I closed my eyes, especially when I closed my eyes. My thoughts weren't my own during those moments. Ideas would surface that felt foreign, like someone else's voice speaking inside my skull. I'd find myself thinking about things I'd never considered, using words that didn't feel familiar on my mental tongue. The interference was subtle at first, just a stray thought here and there that seemed out of place. But then it grew stronger, more insistent. I'd start a sentence and finish it with words I hadn't planned to say. My hands would move without my permission, reaching for objects I didn't remember wanting. The boundary between my mind and something else began to blur until I couldn't tell where I ended and the other presence began. The lights came without warning, not from any source I could identify, but filling the room with a brightness that had weight and texture. The illumination pressed against my skin like warm honey, thick and clinging. Everything in the room cast multiple shadows, each one moving independently of the others. The walls seemed to breathe in that light, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched my pulse. Objects appeared different, their edges softer, their purposes unclear. The familiar became foreign under that strange radiance. When the light finally faded, it left afterimages burned into my vision, geometric patterns that pulsed and shifted every time I blinked. Something changed in me after that. My reflection looked the same but felt wrong, like wearing clothes that almost fit but pull in the wrong places. Food tasted different, not bad exactly, just off somehow. Colors seemed muted during the day and too vivid at night. I'd catch myself staring at ordinary objects, waiting for them to do something they never did before. The metallic scent from that first evening would return at random moments, sharp and clean in my nostrils even when nothing around me could produce such a smell. My dreams became vivid and strange, filled with corridors that led nowhere and rooms with too many doors. But wait, that's not how it happened. The light didn't come all at once. It started as a flicker, like a candle flame in a draft. I was sitting in the chair by the window, the one with the worn velvet arms, when I noticed the shadows on the wall beginning to move wrong. They stretched and twisted, forming shapes that had nothing to do with the objects casting them. The humming was there too, but softer this time, almost musical. My hands felt numb, tingling as if I'd been sitting on them for hours. The presence behind me was closer now, close enough that I could smell something like ozone and copper pennies. When I tried to turn around, my neck wouldn't move, held in place by invisible hands that felt real as anything. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly I could see my breath, or maybe it rose. Memory plays tricks with sensation, mixing hot and cold until they feel the same. My skin broke out in goosebumps that felt like tiny electric shocks. The lace curtains stopped moving despite the breeze I could still feel on my face. Everything went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. Then came the pressure, building in my ears like diving too deep underwater. Something was happening to the space around me, the very air becoming thick and resistant. I don't try to understand it anymore. Understanding requires a kind of linear thinking that doesn't apply to what I experienced. The fragments remain scattered, each one vivid and immediate when it surfaces, but impossible to arrange into a coherent sequence. Sometimes I think I dreamed it all. Sometimes I'm certain it was more real than anything before or since. The only thing I know for sure is that something fundamental shifted that evening, something that can't be shifted back. The metallic smell still comes to me sometimes, usually when I'm almost asleep. The humming too, though fainter now, like an echo of an echo. I've learned not to chase these sensations, not to try to force them into making sense. They exist in a part of my mind that operates by different rules, where cause and effect dance around each other without ever quite touching. I still live in the same house, sleep in the same bed, go through the same daily routines, but I'm different now, marked by something I can't name or explain. The change isn't visible to others, I don't think, but I feel it constantly, a subtle alteration in the fabric of who I am. It's like having a word on the tip of your tongue that never quite forms, or remembering a song you can't quite hum. The worst part isn't the confusion or the fragmented memories. It's the certainty that if I could just piece it all together, if I could just remember it clearly, I would understand something important about the nature of reality itself. But that understanding hovers just beyond reach, protected by the merciful fog of imperfect recollection. Sometimes I catch myself standing by that same window, looking out at shadows that fall in perfectly normal ways. The curtains move with the breeze exactly as they should. The clock ticks its steady rhythm. Everything appears normal, but I know better now. I know that normal is just a thin veneer over something far stranger and more complex than we usually allow ourselves to perceive. I don't want to remember any more than I already do. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Some knowledge changes you in ways that can't be undone. I've learned to live with the fragments, to let them exist without demanding they make sense. It's the only way to stay sane, to function in a world that insists on logic and linear time. The cool evening breeze still comes through that window sometimes, carrying with it the faintest hint of lavender and metal. When it does, I simply close my eyes and wait for it to pass, grateful that some memories remain mercifully incomplete. Story 7. I sat motionless, eyes glued to the window, watching the curtain sway gently as though someone unseen tugged at its edge. The room was otherwise silent, save for the soft rasp of leaves brushing against the glass. Shadows pooled in the corners, thickening with each passing moment, yet refused to solidify into anything recognizable. The atmosphere felt stifled, as if holding its breath in anticipation. A distant thud echoed, yet no source made itself known. My heart raced as my gaze drifted back to the curtain, now perfectly still, but the window latch it was unhooked. Nothing happened that night. I want to make that clear from the start. Whatever you might think you're about to hear, it didn't really happen. Not the way it felt, anyway. I was tired, probably more tired than I realized, and when you're that exhausted, your mind plays tricks on you, creates things that aren't there, makes ordinary sounds seem significant when they're just background noise. The curtain was moving because of the wind, that's all. Wind gets through old windows even when they're closed. The latch being unhooked doesn't mean anything either. I probably just forgot to secure it properly before going to bed. I do that sometimes when I'm distracted, when my mind is elsewhere, which it was that night, thinking about work, about bills, about all the usual things that keep people awake. I didn't see anything outside when I looked through the glass, just darkness, the kind you expect when you live far enough from the main roads that streetlights don't reach. The trees were there, of course, swaying in whatever breeze was moving through the area. Trees always look strange at night, their branches creating shapes that could be mistaken for other things if you let your imagination run wild, which I didn't. I'm not the type to let my mind wander like that. The sound I heard wasn't footsteps, it was probably just the house settling, or maybe something fell in the kitchen. Old houses make noise, everyone knows that. Wood expands and contracts, pipes shift, small objects tumble from shelves. There's always a reasonable explanation for these things. The fact that it sounded rhythmic, like someone walking slowly across gravel, doesn't mean that's what it was. Sound travels strangely at night, gets distorted by the air, by the walls, by your own tired brain trying to make sense of random noise. I stayed by the window for maybe 10 minutes, just watching. Not because I was worried about anything, but because once you're awake, really awake, it takes time to wind back down. The glass felt cold against my forehead when I leaned against it, which was normal for that season. Though I do remember thinking it seemed colder than it should have been, like something was drawing the warmth out of it from the other side. But that was just the temperature difference between inside and outside, basic physics. The light I thought I saw moving between the trees wasn't really there. It was probably just my eyes adjusting to the darkness, creating phantom illumination where none existed. Or maybe it was a reflection from something inside the room, bouncing off the window at an angle that made it appear to be outside. Reflections can be tricky that way, especially when you're looking through glass that isn't perfectly clean. And my windows weren't perfectly clean. I'd been meaning to wash them for weeks. But the light did seem to pulse in a very deliberate pattern. 3 short flashes, then a longer one, then 3 short flashes again. Like it was trying to communicate something, which is ridiculous because lights don't communicate. They just are or they aren't. They don't have intention or purpose beyond their basic function. Even if this particular light seemed to be responding to my presence at the window, growing brighter when I moved closer and dimming when I stepped back. That was just coincidence, my tired mind imposing patterns where none existed. I never left the house that night. I want to be very clear about that. I stood at the window, watched for a while, then went back to bed. I didn't unlock the front door. I didn't step outside in my bare feet. I didn't walk across the yard toward the tree line where the light was coming from. None of that happened, even though I can still feel the dew-soaked grass between my toes, cold and slightly slimy with moisture. Even though I remember the way the air smelled, metallic and sharp, like the moment before lightning strikes. The thing is, I know what my yard looks like at night because I've seen it from the window plenty of times. I know where the path curves around the old oak tree, where the ground dips slightly near the fence line. I know these things from inside the house looking out. That's the only way I could know them. It's not like I've ever walked that path in complete darkness, feeling my way forward with outstretched hands, following a light that seemed to retreat as I approached it. I definitely didn't reach the edge of the woods. I didn't push through the low-hanging branches that caught at my hair and night clothes. I didn't feel bark scraping against my palms as I steadied myself against tree trunks I couldn't see. The woods at night are no place for someone in bare feet and thin pajamas. Too many roots to trip over, too many thorns and sharp branches waiting to cut exposed skin. I would never be foolish enough to venture into that darkness, no matter what kind of light was beckoning from deeper within the trees. But I do remember how quiet it was in there. Not the normal quiet of a sleeping forest, but something deeper, more complete. Like the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Even the insects had stopped their usual nighttime chorus. The only sound was my own breathing and the soft whisper of my feet against fallen leaves, which I wouldn't know unless I had actually been there, but I wasn't. I was safe in my house, in my bed, trying to fall back asleep. The clearing I didn't find was perfectly circular, as if someone had measured it carefully and removed every tree within a specific radius. The grass there was different too, shorter and more uniform than the wild growth everywhere else in the woods. It felt almost artificial under my feet, too soft and springy, like it had been cultivated for a specific purpose. In the center of this clearing that I never saw was a depression in the ground, not quite deep enough to be called a hole, but too regular to be natural. I didn't lie down in that depression. I didn't feel compelled to rest there, as if something was encouraging me to make myself comfortable. The earth wasn't warm against my back, warmer than it should have been considering how cool the night air was. I didn't stare up through the gap in the canopy at stars that seemed brighter and closer than usual, arranged in patterns I'd never noticed before. Stars don't rearrange themselves. They stay where they're supposed to be, following the same predictable paths they've followed for thousands of years. The humming sound I didn't hear wasn't coming from the ground beneath me. It was probably just tinnitus, that ringing in your ears that happens sometimes when everything else is too quiet. Though it did seem to have a rhythm to it, almost like a heartbeat, slow and steady and somehow reassuring. It made me feel drowsy, relaxed in a way I hadn't felt in months, like whatever tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders and neck was finally melting away. But that was just because I was lying down, taking the weight off my tired muscles. I don't remember how long I stayed there in that clearing I never visited. It could have been minutes or hours. The stars above me didn't seem to move at all, as if someone had paused the normal rotation of the earth just for this moment. The humming continued, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always present. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, from the ground and the trees and the air itself, like the entire forest was singing a lullaby meant just for me. When I finally opened my eyes, I was back in my own bed, which makes sense because that's where I'd been the entire time. I must have dozed off at some point during the night and dreamed the whole thing. Dreams can feel incredibly real sometimes, especially when you're overtired. They can include sensory details so vivid that you wake up convinced they actually happened. The human brain is remarkably good at creating false memories, at filling in gaps with information that feels authentic but isn't based in reality. My feet weren't dirty when I checked them the next morning. They were perfectly clean, just as they should have been if I'd spent the entire night indoors. The fact that I felt compelled to check them at all was probably just residual anxiety from the dream. Sometimes your subconscious holds onto details from dreams and makes you question what's real and what isn't. It's a normal psychological response to particularly vivid nighttime imagery. The small scratches on my arms were from something else entirely. I probably bumped into something during the day, or maybe my cat had been more playful than usual. Cats leave marks like that all the time, thin parallel lines that look like they came from thorns or branches. The scratches didn't form any kind of pattern, and they certainly didn't look like they'd been made deliberately, as if something had been trying to guide me or mark me in some way. I didn't find leaves in my hair when I showered that morning. Any plant matter that might have been there came from the potted ferns in my bedroom, or from working in the garden earlier that week. Leaves stick to things, get carried around on clothing and in hair without you noticing. It doesn't mean you've been wandering through the woods at night, following mysterious lights to clearings that may or may not exist. The clearing is still there, of course. I can see it from my bedroom window if I look carefully through the trees. It's just a natural gap in the forest, the kind of thing that happens when a large tree falls and creates space for different vegetation to grow. There's nothing unusual about it, nothing that would draw someone out of their warm bed in the middle of the night. It's just another part of the landscape, as ordinary and unremarkable as everything else around here. I haven't been back to check on it. There's no reason to go tramping through the woods just to look at an empty patch of ground. Besides, the trees are thick in that direction, and the underbrush has probably grown up since the last time anyone walked through there. It would be difficult to find the exact spot again, even if someone wanted to, which I don't. There's nothing there worth seeing. The dreams have been coming more frequently lately, but that's probably just stress. When your mind is overloaded with daily concerns, it tends to work through problems during sleep, creating elaborate scenarios that feel meaningful, but are really just your brain's way of processing information. The fact that they're always the same dream, always ending in the same clearing with the same warm earth and the same humming sound, doesn't mean anything significant. Recurring dreams are common. Most people have them at some point in their lives. I've been sleeping with the window latch secured now, making sure it's properly fastened before I go to bed. Not because I'm worried about anything getting in, but because the drafts were making it difficult to maintain a comfortable temperature in the room. Old windows let in cold air, and cold air disrupts sleep patterns. It's just basic home maintenance, the kind of thing any responsible homeowner would do. The curtains don't move as much anymore now that the window is properly sealed. They hang straight and still, the way curtains are supposed to hang. Sometimes I catch myself watching them anyway, waiting for that gentle sway that used to happen when the latch was loose. But they remain motionless, undisturbed by any breeze that might be trying to find its way inside. Everything is back to normal now. The house is quiet at night the way it should be. No strange sounds, no unexplained lights, no compelling urges to leave the safety of my bed and venture into the darkness outside. I sleep soundly from sunset to sunrise, undisturbed by dreams or visions or whatever those episodes were. My feet stay clean, my arms remain unscratched, and my hair is free of forest debris when I wake up each morning. There's really nothing more to say about it. Nothing happened, nothing changed, and nothing will happen again. I'm certain of that, completely certain. Although I did notice yesterday that the window latch seems to be working itself loose again, despite my efforts to keep it secure. And the curtains have started moving just slightly as if something outside is calling them to dance. But that's just the wind. It's always just the wind, story 8. I keep trying to remember what happened after I stepped into that room. The memories come in fragments, like broken glass catching light at different angles. Some pieces are sharp and clear, others blur the moment I try to focus on them. The silence, that's what I remember most clearly. Not just quiet, but silence that pressed against my eardrums like water. I can still feel it sometimes, that weight pushing inward until my pulse becomes the loudest sound in the world. The living room was there, wasn't it? The couch where I used to sit, the coffee table with its familiar ring stains. But everything felt borrowed, like someone had recreated my home from a photograph they'd studied but never lived in. There was a hum, low, so low I felt it more than heard it. It lived in my chest, vibrated through my ribs. Sometimes I wake up and it's still there, thrumming beneath my thoughts. I don't know when it started. Maybe it was always there and I just noticed it for the first time. Maybe it followed me home. The curtains, I mentioned the curtains, didn't I? They were wrong, not the fabric or the color, but the way they hung, too still. Air should move fabric even slightly, but these curtains existed in their own pocket of motionless space. Behind them, the window showed the yard I'd known for years, but the grass looked painted on, the trees frozen mid-sway. I touched the wall. The paint felt warm under my palm, warmer than it should have been. The texture was familiar, but the temperature was all wrong, like touching skin that had been holding its breath. My hand left a mark, not visible but felt. The wall remembered my touch, held onto it even after I pulled away. There was someone else there, not in the room, but nearby, close enough that I could sense their presence, feel the displacement of air that comes with another person's breathing. But when I turned, when I searched, nothing, just the persistent feeling of being observed, catalogued, measured. The floorboards should have creaked. I know those boards, know exactly which ones sing under pressure and which ones stay silent. But my footsteps fell into a void, absorbed completely. I jumped once just to test it, and the sound disappeared before it could echo. The house was eating noise, swallowing it whole. I found myself in the kitchen without remembering the walk there. The refrigerator hummed its normal hum, different from the other hum, the one that lived in my bones now. The clock on the wall had stopped, its hands frozen in a position that meant nothing to me. But time was still moving, wasn't it? I could feel it passing, sliding by like water through cupped hands. The smell came later, or maybe it was there from the beginning and I only noticed it after everything else went wrong. Metallic, sharp, like pennies held too long in a sweaty palm. It clung to the back of my throat, coated my tongue until I could taste it more than smell it. I opened windows, but the smell stayed, lived in the air itself. Something moved in my peripheral vision, always at the edge, never quite there when I turned to look. A shadow that didn't match any object in the room, a shift in the light that followed no logical source. I started to doubt my own eyes, wonder if the trauma had damaged something fundamental about how I processed the world. But what trauma? That's the piece I can't grasp, the memory that slides away every time I reach for it. Something happened before I came home, something that left me hollow and strange. But the harder I try to remember, the more it recedes, like trying to hold water in a broken cup. The bathroom mirror showed my reflection, but delayed. I would move and watch myself catch up a fraction of a second later, as if the mirror was receiving a broadcast from somewhere far away. My face looked familiar but foreign, like meeting a distant relative who shares your features but not your history. The person in the mirror had seen something I couldn't remember. I called out just to hear my own voice, to prove I still existed in a measurable way. The sound came out wrong, flattened and distorted, like hearing myself through thick glass. The house absorbed my voice the same way it had absorbed my footsteps, leaving me more alone than silence ever could. The light in the hallway flickered, but not in any pattern I could understand. Not the regular flutter of a dying bulb, but something more intentional, more conscious. It would dim when I wasn't looking directly at it, brighten when I turned away. playing games with my attention, testing the limits of my perception. I sat on the couch and it felt different, not softer or firmer, but different in a way I couldn't name. Like sitting on furniture in a dream where everything looks right but nothing feels real. The cushions held my weight but didn't conform to my body, maintained their shape as if I wasn't really there. The telephone rang. I remember that clearly because it was the first normal sound I'd heard since entering the house. But when I answered, the line was dead. Not disconnected, not silent, but dead in a way that suggested it had never been alive to begin with. I held the receiver to my ear anyway, listening to the absence of sound, hoping for something to break through. There were photographs on the mantel, pictures of a life I recognized but couldn't quite claim. The faces were familiar, the places known, but they felt like evidence of someone else's existence. Had I lived these moments or just observed them? Had I been present in my own life or always slightly removed, watching from the outside? The air grew thick, not humid, not warm, just dense with possibility. Each breath required effort, as if the atmosphere had gained weight while I wasn't paying attention. I found myself breathing shallowly, afraid to take too much of whatever the air had become. Something brushed against my arm, light as a feather, brief as a blink, but unmistakably intentional. I spun around but found nothing, just the empty room and its borrowed stillness. The sensation lingered on my skin, a ghost touch that reminded me I was still capable of being affected by the world around me. The hum grew stronger. I could feel it in my teeth now, vibrating through my jaw and into my skull. It had a rhythm, almost musical, like a song played at a frequency just below human hearing. Sometimes I catch myself humming along, though I don't remember learning the melody. I tried to leave. That's important, I think. I tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't open. Not locked, not stuck, just unwilling. The handle turned freely, but the door remained closed, as if it had forgotten how to swing outward. I pushed against it, threw my weight into it, but it held firm against all logic and physics. The windows were the same. They looked like windows, clear glass in wooden frames, but they wouldn't open. Not painted shut, not latched, just permanently sealed by some invisible force. I could see through them clearly, watch the world outside continue its normal existence while I remained trapped in this pocket of wrongness. That's when I started to understand that something fundamental had changed, not just in the house, but in me. I was different now, altered in ways I couldn't measure or explain. The person who had left this house was not the same person trying to return to it. The mirror in the hallway showed someone else, just for a moment, just long enough to register the wrongness before my reflection reasserted itself. But I saw them, the other person, the one who might have been me if things had gone differently. They looked afraid. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have because I remember waking up. The house was darker, though no time seemed to have passed. The quality of light had changed, become thinner, less substantial. Shadows fell at impossible angles, defying the position of any visible light source. The smell was stronger now, metallic and sharp and somehow familiar. I followed it through the house, room to room, but it grew no stronger or weaker. It existed everywhere equally, as if it had soaked into the walls themselves, become part of the house's essential nature. I found marks on the walls, not scratches or stains, but impressions, as if someone had pressed their hands against the paint and left invisible prints. I could feel them when I ran my fingers over the surface, slight depressions that formed patterns I couldn't interpret. They were warm, warmer than the surrounding wall, as if the hands that made them were still there, still pressing. The television turned on by itself. No picture, just static, but the sound was wrong. Instead of the usual white noise, it played something that sounded almost like voices, almost like words, but in a language I didn't recognize. I stood in front of it, listening, trying to make sense of the sounds, until I realized they were trying to make sense of me. My reflection in the black screen showed someone I almost recognized. The features were mine, but arranged differently, as if my face had been taken apart and reassembled by someone working from memory. The eyes were too wide, the mouth too small, the whole expression too knowing. I touched the screen and it was warm, warmer than electronics should be. The static responded to my touch, swirling around my fingertips like smoke. For a moment I thought I saw something in the patterns, a face or a figure, but it dissolved before I could focus on it. The house began to feel smaller, not physically but dimensionally, as if the space between walls was contracting. I could walk the same distances, count the same steps, but the journey felt compressed, folded in on itself. Rooms that should have been far apart felt adjacent, connected by impossible geometry. I started to doubt my own memories. Had the house always been like this? Had I simply never noticed the wrongness, too distracted by daily life to see what was really there? Maybe this was normal and I was the aberration, the foreign element disrupting a perfectly functioning system. The basement door was open. I don't remember opening it, don't remember even noticing it before, but there it was, dark mouth yawning at the bottom of the stairs. The darkness wasn't just absence of light, but presence of something else, something that pushed back against illumination. I didn't go down. Some instinct, some primitive warning system kept me at the top of the stairs, but I could feel something down there waiting, patient. It had been waiting for a long time and could wait longer if necessary. The hum was coming from down there. I was sure of it now. The low frequency that had been living in my bones originated in that basement darkness, traveled up through the floorboards and into my body. I was receiving a signal I couldn't decode, a message in a language my conscious mind didn't speak. I closed the door, but the hum continued. Distance meant nothing to it. Barriers were irrelevant. It had found me and would not let go, would follow me wherever I went, a constant reminder of something I couldn't quite remember. The kitchen faucet dripped. Each drop fell with perfect timing, like a metronome keeping time for an unheard symphony. But when I turned the handle to stop it, no water came out. The sound continued, regular and insistent, though nothing fell from the spout. I began to suspect I was not alone in the house, not in any conventional sense, but alone in the way that matters. Something shared the space with me, occupied the same rooms, breathed the same air. We coexisted without meeting, like two radio stations broadcasting on frequencies so close they created interference. The interference was getting stronger. Reality was becoming unstable, prone to sudden shifts and unexplained changes. I would enter a room and find furniture rearranged, not dramatically but subtly, just enough to create unease. Pictures hung at slightly different angles, books stood in different orders on shelves. I started writing things down, trying to create some record of events, some anchor in the shifting landscape of my perception. But the words looked wrong on paper, foreign symbols that might have meant something to someone else. My own handwriting had become unrecognizable, as if my hand was being guided by unfamiliar intentions. Sleep became impossible. Not insomnia, but the complete absence of the possibility of sleep. My body remained alert, my mind active, as if some essential switch had been thrown, removing my access to unconsciousness. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move in patterns that followed no earthly logic. The patterns began to make sense. not intellectually, but viscerally, the way a song makes sense before you understand the lyrics. The shadows were communicating, sharing information about my presence, my state, my potential. I was being evaluated by forces I couldn't see or comprehend. My skin felt different, not painful, not diseased, but altered in some fundamental way. The sensation of touch had changed, become more immediate and less filtered. I could feel air currents like gentle hands, sense vibrations through surfaces I wasn't even touching. My body was becoming more sensitive, more receptive to stimuli I'd never noticed before. The house was teaching me. Each strange event, each impossible occurrence, was a lesson in a curriculum I hadn't chosen to study. I was learning to perceive reality differently, to accept impossibility as simply another form of possibility. But learning what and why, those questions circled endlessly through my mind, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. I was changing, evolving, becoming something new, but toward what purpose I couldn't fathom. The hum has become a part of me now. I carry it everywhere, this low frequency that connects me to something larger and stranger than my individual existence. Sometimes I think it's the sound of the universe breathing, the background noise of reality itself. I stopped trying to leave. The house and I have reached an understanding, an accommodation. I provide something it needs, and it provides me with shelter from a world that would no longer recognize what I've become. The memories are getting stronger now, clearer. Soon I think I'll remember everything, understand the full scope of what happened to me, what I agreed to, what I became. The knowledge is rising like water in a well, approaching the surface where I can finally drink from it. But I'm not sure I want to remember. Some truths are too large for human consciousness, too strange for minds that evolved to navigate a simpler reality. Maybe forgetting was a mercy, a temporary reprieve from understanding too much. The hum is calling me now. It has something to show me, something I need to see. The basement door stands open again, and this time I think I'm ready to descend, ready to meet whatever has been waiting so patiently in the dark. The memories are almost complete now. I can feel them gathering, preparing to flood back into consciousness. Soon I'll know everything, understand the full truth of what I experienced, what I chose, what I became. But first I need to go downstairs. Something is stirring down there, something that recognizes me, welcomes me home. The hum grows stronger with each step I take toward the basement door. I think I'm ready now, ready to remember, ready to become what I was always meant to be. The door is open, the darkness is calling, and finally I'm ready to answer. Story 9. The clock hands remained still, refusing their usual march. I moved through the hallway, each step lost on the carpet that swallowed sound. Flicking the switch for the overhead light, I found the room stayed dim, shadows wavering as if unsure of their own existence. The air felt thick, neither warm nor cool, just present in a way that pressed against my skin. My fingertips brushed the wall, expecting a familiar texture, but it felt slick, unrecognizable. The quiet settled deeper, an entity of its own, as I hesitated at the door frame, uncertain whether to cross the threshold or retreat. I wake with the taste of copper on my tongue, always copper. The sheets beneath me are damp, though I don't remember sweating. My bedroom window faces east, but the light filtering through feels wrong, too white, like it's been drained of warmth. I press my palm against the glass and feel vibrations that shouldn't be there. The world outside looks the same as always, yet different in ways I can't name. The buzzing starts again. It lives somewhere behind my left ear, a frequency that makes my teeth ache. I turn my head, searching for the source, but the sound moves with me, always with me. The doctor said it might be stress, suggested I get more sleep, eat better, exercise. She didn't understand when I told her about the gaps, the spaces in my day where time simply isn't. There were lights behind the trees. Morning coffee tastes like metal. I pour it down the sink and watch the dark liquid spiral away, but the metallic taste remains. My reflection in the kitchen window shows someone who looks like me, but the eyes are different, whiter, as if they've seen something they shouldn't have. I blink and the reflection blinks back, but there's a delay, just a fraction of a second, that makes my stomach clench. The phone rings. I answer, but hear only static, punctuated by something that might be breathing, or might be wind. The sound fills my ear, travels down my spine, settles in my chest like a weight. I hang up, and immediately the silence feels too loud. I don't remember ever coming back. The hallway stretches longer than it should. 13 steps from the kitchen to the living room. I've counted them 1,000 times, but today there are more. I lose count somewhere around 20, my bare feet sinking into carpet that feels deeper, softer, like walking through sand. The overhead light flickers in patterns that almost seem deliberate. 3 quick pulses, then darkness, then a steady glow that makes everything look underwater. My fingertips find the wall again, still slick, still wrong. The texture shifts under my touch, almost breathing, and I pull my hand away quickly. The skin of my palm tingles for hours afterward. The door at the end of the hall stands half open. It's always half open now, though I close it every night before bed. The darkness beyond it moves, subtle as smoke, and occasionally I catch glimpses of something that might be light, or eyes. The space smells sharp, like ozone before a storm mixed with something else, something organic and unfamiliar. The noise didn't come from outside. I find myself standing in rooms with no memory of entering them. The basement mostly, though I never go to the basement. The concrete floor is cold against my feet, and there are marks on the walls I don't remember seeing before. Not writing exactly, but patterns that hurt to look at directly. They seem to shift when I'm not focusing, rearranging themselves into configurations that make my head pound. The buzzing grows stronger down here. It fills the space between my thoughts, making it hard to remember why I came down, making it hard to remember anything at all. Time moves strangely now. I'll sit down to eat lunch and suddenly it's dark outside. Or I'll go to bed and wake up standing in the kitchen, fully dressed, car keys in my hand. The clock on the microwave blinks 12:00, but it's not broken. I checked. The power never went out. There were lights behind the trees. The pattern repeats, always the same sequence. I wake with copper on my tongue, the buzzing behind my ear, the taste of metal in my coffee. The hallway stretches and contracts like something alive. The half-open door breathes darkness, but each time something new emerges from the fog. Today I remember the cold, not winter cold, but something deeper, a chill that started inside my bones and worked its way out. I was standing somewhere I shouldn't have been, looking at something I shouldn't have seen. The memory slides away before I can grasp it, leaving only the sensation of ice in my veins and the echo of that electrical hum. My skin prickles in warm rooms now. Goosebumps rise on my arms when the heater runs, when sunlight streams through windows, when I step into a hot shower. The cold follows me everywhere, a phantom sensation that has nothing to do with temperature. I don't remember ever coming back. The reflection in the bathroom mirror shows marks on my neck, faint circles perfectly round like someone pressed coins against my skin. They don't hurt, but they're warm to the touch, warmer than the rest of my body. When I lean closer to examine them, the buzzing intensifies until I have to grip the sink to stay upright. The marks fade by evening, but I can still feel them. phantom pressure that pulses in rhythm with my heartbeat. Night brings the dreams that aren't dreams. I'm walking through a place that might be my house but isn't. The walls bend at impossible angles and the ceiling disappears into darkness that seems solid. Footsteps echo behind me, matching my pace exactly, but when I turn there's nothing there. Just the sound of my own breathing, amplified and strange. The air tastes like copper here too, like metal and ozone and something else, something alive. The noise didn't come from outside. I find notes in my handwriting that I don't remember writing, single words on scraps of paper scattered throughout the house. Waiting, watching, return. The ink is strange, darker than any pen I own, and it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. I throw the notes away, but they reappear in different rooms, different pockets, different drawers. The handwriting becomes less familiar each time, still mine but changed. The letters lean at odd angles, some words written backwards, others in languages I don't recognize but somehow understand. The basement calls to me, not with sound but with something deeper. A pull I feel in my chest, behind my ribs, drawing me down those concrete steps. The patterns on the walls are clearer now, more defined. They pulse with their own rhythm, slightly out of sync with my heartbeat, creating a discord that makes my vision blur. I kneel on the cold floor and press my palms against the concrete. The buzzing stops. For the first time in weeks, silence fills my skull completely. But the silence is worse than the sound. In the quiet, I can hear something else, something waiting. There were lights behind the trees. The memory surfaces like something drowning in reverse. I was outside, though I don't remember leaving the house. The grass was wet with dew that soaked through my shoes, and the air smelled of summer rain and electricity. Between the branches, lights moved in patterns too deliberate to be natural, too bright to be anything earthly. I walked toward them, I remember that much. Each step took me further from everything familiar, deeper into a space that existed between spaces. The lights grew larger, brighter, until they filled my vision completely, until there was nothing but white and the sound of my own pulse echoing in the void. Then nothing, a gap where memory should be, filled only with the taste of copper and the lingering sensation of cold. I don't remember ever coming back. But I must have, because I'm here, in this house that feels like mine but isn't, with these walls that breathe and shift when I'm not looking, with this hallway that changes length and this door that won't stay closed and this buzzing that lives inside my skull like a parasite. The clock hands remain still, refusing their usual march. I move through the hallway again, each step lost on carpet that swallows sound. The overhead light flickers in its familiar pattern, and I reach for the wall with fingertips that already know what they'll find. The texture is slick, unrecognizable, alive. The door at the end of the hall stands half open, breathing darkness and the scent of ozone. Beyond it, something waits with infinite patience. Something that knows I'll return because I always return, because I never really left. The noise didn't come from outside. It came from inside, from the spaces between thoughts, from the gaps in memory, from the place where time stands still and copper fills your mouth and lights move behind trees that shouldn't exist. I step toward the threshold, uncertain whether to cross or retreat, knowing that the choice was made long ago in a moment I can't quite remember. The buzzing builds to a crescendo behind my ear, and somewhere in the white noise, I hear the echo of my own voice saying words I don't recognize in a language that tastes like metal and feels like coming home. The door breathes open wider, inviting me back to a place I never left. Story 10. My fingers brushed against the rough fibers as I pulled away from the carpet. The sensation lingered as if it had anchored me to that spot. A faint draft slipped into the room, curling around my ankles with a cold insistence. The air tasted stale, tinged with something metallic, almost like rust. Quiet seeped through the walls, yet beneath it an unsteady rhythm pulsed, unsettling in its irregularity. I stepped back, and everything felt like it was waiting, poised for the change I hadn't noticed yet. The first dream came on a Tuesday, I think, or maybe it was Wednesday. The days had been blending together lately, work stress making everything feel underwater. I remember lying in bed, that drowsy state between sleep and waking, when I noticed the light. It wasn't the usual amber glow from the street lamp outside my window. This was different, cleaner, whiter, an oval shape that seemed to hover just beyond the edge of my vision, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. When I turned my head to look directly at it, it was gone. Just stress, I told myself. Too many late nights, too much coffee. The mind plays tricks when it's tired. But the hum stayed with me even after I woke up. A constant, low frequency that seemed to vibrate somewhere behind my ears. I shook my head, stretched, and the sound faded into the ordinary morning noise of traffic and distant voices. The second dream came 3 nights later, or maybe it was the same night. Sleep had become strange, elastic. I found myself back in that same drowsy state, but this time the light was closer. The oval glow hung above me, steady and patient, and beneath it came that hum again, but now I could hear something else threaded through it. A voice, perhaps, but modulated and distant, like someone speaking through water. The light pulsed, and I felt myself lifting. Not my body exactly, but something inside me, as if gravity had loosened its grip on whatever part of me was most essential. The sensation was neither pleasant nor unpleasant, just profoundly strange, like being gently pulled upward by invisible strings. The voice grew clearer, though I still couldn't make out words. It had a metallic quality, processed and clean, like sound filtered through expensive equipment. It seemed to be asking something, waiting for a response I didn't know how to give. When I woke, my mouth tasted of ozone, sharp and artificial, like the air after a thunderstorm, but somehow more manufactured. I ran my tongue across my lips, expecting the taste to fade, but it lingered for hours. That morning I noticed the small circular mark on my forearm, perfectly round, about the size of a dime, slightly raised and tender to the touch. I couldn't remember bumping into anything, couldn't recall any injury that might have caused it, just a small, inexplicable mark that hadn't been there the day before. The radio in my car kept cutting to static during my commute. Brief interruptions, always at the same frequency, always lasting exactly 3 seconds. I changed stations, but the static followed, that same modulated hum threading through the white noise. I turned the radio off and drove in silence, but even then, I could swear I heard something humming just at the edge of perception. The third dream felt more real than my waking life had in weeks. The light was no longer above me but surrounding me, a soft oval glow that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. The humming had resolved into something almost musical, a series of tones that rose and fell in patterns that felt familiar, like a song I'd heard long ago but couldn't quite remember. The voice was clearer now, though still processed through that metallic filter. It wasn't speaking English, or maybe it was speaking something deeper than language, something that bypassed my ears and went straight to understanding. I felt observed, studied, but not in a way that frightened me. More like being seen by something that already knew everything about me and was simply confirming details. The lifting sensation was stronger this time. I could feel my body, or the idea of my body, being drawn upward with gentle insistence. There was a moment when I seemed to pass through something, a membrane or barrier that felt like moving through thick, warm air. On the other side, everything was quiet except for that musical humming, and the light was everywhere, soft and encompassing. I tried to speak, to ask where I was, but my voice came out as that same modulated tone. The realization should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like remembering something I'd temporarily forgotten. Of course my voice sounded like that here. Of course this was how communication worked in this place. When I woke, it took several minutes to remember how to move my arms and legs. My body felt heavy, unfamiliar, like I was wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. The taste of ozone was stronger now, and it didn't fade as the morning progressed. The mark on my forearm had changed. It was still circular, but now there were smaller marks arranged around it in a precise pattern. 5 tiny dots, each one perfectly spaced, each one tender to the touch. I stared at them in the bathroom mirror, trying to remember when they might have appeared, but my memory felt fuzzy, like trying to recall details from a movie I'd seen years ago. The static was everywhere now. My phone would cut to white noise during calls. The television would flicker to empty channels that shouldn't exist. Even my laptop screen would occasionally show patterns of interference that looked almost like text in a language I didn't recognize. But it was the humming that bothered me most. I could hear it constantly now, even in perfect silence. That same musical pattern, rising and falling, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like that metallic voice speaking just below the threshold of understanding. I began to wonder if I was having some kind of breakdown, if stress had finally pushed my mind past its breaking point. The fourth dream didn't feel like a dream at all. I was simply there in that place of soft light and musical humming, and it felt like coming home after a long, confusing journey. The voice spoke to me, and I understood perfectly, though I couldn't have translated the words for anyone else. It was explaining something important, something about patterns and cycles and the thin places where one reality touches another. I found myself responding, my voice still carrying that processed, metallic quality. We were having a conversation, though about what I couldn't say. It felt significant, like discussing the fundamental nature of existence, but the specifics slipped away even as we spoke. The lifting sensation was constant now, and I realized I was moving through space, though space itself seemed fluid here, more like a concept than a physical reality. There were others around me, presences I couldn't quite see but could feel, all of them familiar in a way that made my chest ache with something like nostalgia. One of them approached, and I knew without being told that this was someone I'd spoken with before many times. They showed me something, a series of images that flowed through my mind like water. Scenes of my life, but from angles I'd never seen, moments captured from above or from impossible distances. There I was, sleeping in my bed, but the perspective was from somewhere near the ceiling. There I was, driving to work, but seen from high above, my car a small speck moving along predetermined paths. The images shifted, showing me other versions of myself, other conversations in this place of light and music. I saw myself nodding, agreeing to something, accepting some kind of responsibility or assignment. The me in these images looked calm, purposeful, like someone who understood exactly what was happening and why. When I woke, I was standing in my kitchen, fully dressed, with no memory of getting out of bed. The clock showed 3 in the morning, but I felt wide awake, alert in a way that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. The taste of ozone was so strong I could barely swallow, and the humming had become a constant companion, sometimes soft, sometimes loud enough to make me wonder how my neighbors weren't complaining. The marks on my arm had multiplied. The original circle was now surrounded by several smaller patterns, each one precise and deliberate. They didn't hurt, but they felt warm to the touch, like small engines running just beneath my skin. I called in sick to work that day. The idea of sitting in meetings, of pretending to care about quarterly reports and budget projections, seemed absurd. Instead, I found myself drawn to research, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I spent hours reading about sleep disorders, about hallucinations and false memories, about the strange tricks an exhausted mind can play on itself. But none of it felt right. The dreams, if they were dreams, had a consistency and logic that my sleeping mind had never produced before, and the physical evidence was mounting. The marks, the taste, the constant humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Late that afternoon, I discovered something that made my hands shake. In my jacket pocket, I found a small device I'd never seen before. It was smooth, metallic, about the size of a thumb drive, but with no visible ports or buttons. When I held it, it grew warm, and the humming in my head became clearer, more musical. I should have been terrified. I should have called someone, sought help, demanded explanations. Instead, I felt a deep sense of recognition, as if I'd been carrying this device for years and had simply forgotten about it. When I pressed it gently, it pulsed with that same oval light I'd seen in my dreams, and for just a moment I could hear that metallic voice speaking clearly, saying something that sounded like welcome back. The fifth dream began before I was fully asleep. I felt the familiar lifting sensation as I lay in bed, eyes still open, watching my ceiling dissolve into soft, encompassing light. The transition was seamless, like stepping from one room into another, and I realized that the boundary between sleeping and waking had become meaningless. The others were waiting for me, those familiar presences I couldn't quite see but knew intimately. They gathered around as the metallic voice, which I now understood was my own voice in this place, began to speak. We discussed the schedule, the careful timing required, the importance of maintaining the barrier between experiences until the integration was complete. I understood now that this had been happening for much longer than I'd realized. The dreams weren't recent developments, but recovered memories, pieces of a larger pattern that had been temporarily hidden from my waking consciousness. The marks on my arm weren't injuries, but interfaces, connection points that allowed for clearer communication across the boundary between states of being. The device in my pocket was mine, had always been mine, a tool I'd requested to help with the transition. Its presence in my waking life meant the process was nearly complete, that the separation between my two selves was finally dissolving. As the conversation continued, I felt a profound sense of relief. The confusion, the fear, the sense of losing my mind, all of it had been necessary but temporary. Soon, there would be no more jarring transitions, no more forgotten conversations, no more wondering what was real and what was dream. The others showed me the next phase, images of my life continuing but enhanced, enriched by the full integration of both experiences. I would still go to work, still maintain my ordinary existence, but I would also remember these conversations, these journeys, this expanded understanding of what it meant to exist across multiple states of reality. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my bed, but the humming continued, clearer than ever. The light was still there, that soft oval glow, but now I could see it with my eyes open. It pulsed gently above me, patient and familiar, and I realized it had probably been there all along, waiting for me to remember how to see it. The marks on my arm were warm, active, and when I touched them, I could feel the connection completing itself. Information flowed both ways now, my ordinary thoughts and experiences uploading while enhanced understanding and expanded awareness downloaded into my waking consciousness. I got up, made coffee, and prepared for what I knew would be my last day of confusion. Tomorrow, or perhaps later today, the integration would be complete. I would remember everything, understand everything, be everything I was meant to be. The device in my pocket pulsed gently, keeping time with my heartbeat, and I smiled. Soon there would be no more questions, no more fear of losing my mind. There would only be the expanded awareness, the broader existence, the life that spanned multiple states of being. I was almost home. The final dream began as I sat at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold in my hands. The familiar lifting sensation started, but this time I didn't close my eyes. I watched as my ordinary reality became translucent, overlaid with that soft, encompassing light. The humming grew louder, more complex, and I realized it had always been the sound of both realities existing simultaneously, waiting for me to develop the ability to perceive them both. The others materialized around my kitchen, their presence no longer hidden by the limitations of single-state awareness. They looked exactly as I'd expected, though I couldn't have described them moments before. Familiar faces, kind expressions, the appearance of old friends welcoming someone home after a long journey. The metallic voice spoke, but now I could hear it with my ears as well as my enhanced perception. The integration was complete, it said. The barriers had dissolved. I was fully present in both realities now, able to exist as my complete self rather than the fragmented consciousness I'd been living with. I nodded, understanding flooding through me like warm water. The confusion, the fear, the sense of losing my grip on reality, all of it had been the natural result of existing in only one state while my consciousness tried to expand into its full capacity. Now, finally, I was whole. The device in my pocket had become warm, almost hot, and when I pulled it out, it was glowing with that same oval light. One of the others reached out and touched it gently, and suddenly I could remember everything. All the conversations, all the journeys, all the careful planning that had led to this moment of integration. I had volunteered for this, had requested the gradual awakening rather than the sudden shift that some found too jarring. The dreams had been a kindness, a gentle way of reintroducing me to my expanded existence without overwhelming the limited consciousness I'd been maintaining in ordinary reality. Now I could remember both lives clearly. The ordinary one with its job and routines and small concerns, and the expanded one with its broader understanding and deeper connections and responsibilities that spanned multiple states of being. Both were real, both were mine, and now both were fully accessible. The others began to fade, their work complete, but they left behind a sense of continued connection. I would see them again, speak with them again, but now it would be a conscious choice rather than a confused stumble between realities. The light softened, became more natural, and I realized I was looking at my kitchen again. But it was different now, enhanced, more vivid than it had ever been. I could see the energy patterns in the walls, the subtle vibrations that connected everything to everything else, the beautiful complexity that had always been there but hidden from my limited perception. I stood up, stretched, and felt the integration settling into place like a key finding its lock. The humming was still there, but now it was music, a constant song that connected me to the broader reality I was part of. The marks on my arm had stopped being tender and were now simply part of me, interfaces that would allow for continued communication and connection. I walked to the window and looked out at the ordinary world, but now I could see its extraordinary nature as well. Every person walking by was connected to the same expanded reality, though most weren't yet aware of it. Some, like me, were in various stages of integration. Others were still living in single-state consciousness, waiting for their own awakening. The device in my hand pulsed once more, then went dark. Its work was done. I was fully integrated, fully awake, fully myself for the first time in longer than I could remember. I made fresh coffee, sat back down at my kitchen table, and began to plan my day. I had a job to go to, ordinary responsibilities to maintain, but now I also had expanded awareness to integrate into my daily existence. It would be interesting, learning to live as my complete self in both realities simultaneously. The phone rang and I answered it with a smile. My voice sounded different to me now, richer, more complex, though I knew the caller wouldn't notice anything unusual. After all, they were still living in single-state consciousness, still waiting for their own integration. But as I spoke, I felt the warm certainty that their time would come too. Everyone's would eventually. The awakening was spreading, consciousness was expanding, and soon the artificial barriers between realities would dissolve for everyone. I hung up the phone and looked around my kitchen one more time. Everything was exactly as it had been, but now I could see it as it truly was. One small part of an infinite, interconnected reality that spanned dimensions and states of being I was only beginning to understand. The humming continued, soft and musical, and I realized it was the sound of home. As I reached for my coffee cup, I noticed something that made me pause. There on the table next to my hand was a small circular mark in the wood, perfectly round, about the size of a dime, as if something warm had been resting there for a very long time. But I had never seen it before. And my coffee cup was still warm, though I couldn't remember making a fresh pot.